Welcome, everyone. Let's just dive right in because we have a truly fascinating explainer for you today. We're exploring the incredible and honestly sometimes totally invisible power of our own cognitive patterns. We're drawing directly from John Muldoon's deeply personal and highly insightful TED Talk, Being Your Own Life Coach. Today, we're unpacking a massive premise, the idea that our internal thoughts literally shape our external reality. And we aren't just going to talk about dry, abstract theories here. We are looking at the messy, chaotic, real-life journey of how one guy completely rewired his own brain. To really wrap our heads around this, I need you to picture an unbearable scenario. Just imagine being a deeply, intensely angry sixth-grade kid. Your family is going through a horribly dark time. Everything feels entirely out of your control, and you're trapped in a car with your dad. And what is he doing? He's compulsively listening to these overly enthusiastic motivational cassette tapes. Muldoon remembers this one tape guy in particular who confidently promised that if you stand in front of a mirror and say things like, "You look good, today is gonna be awesome," well, eventually you'll get these little voices in your head that just talk to you all day long. Now, to a furious, cynical 11-year-old, this sounded like the absolute worst, most ridiculous toxic positivity imaginable. He fought with his family constantly. He literally just wanted to listen to the radio like a normal person. But here's where the story takes a wild turn. Let's step into section 1, accidental mind control, tricking the brain. Because despite absolutely hating those cassette tapes, this was actually Muldoon's very first exposure to a really massive concept. It planted the seed that, hey, maybe a human brain could actually be intentionally trained and tricked. Look at this wild trajectory. I mean, it's crazy. In sixth grade, he was so furious that his favorite teacher later admitted he legitimately thought Muldoon wouldn't live to see 30. By early ninth grade, he was failing out of high school completely isolated and somehow even angrier. But then, something totally bizarre happens right in the middle of ninth grade. He suddenly starts getting A's and B's. He's making friends. He's acting like a well-adjusted human being. Why? Because a history teacher, whom Muldoon describes as an absolute Jedi master of psychological warfare, managed to trick his brain. This teacher purposely provoked Muldoon, making him so incredibly angry that it completely flipped his motivation. It tricked him into wanting to get good grades just to prove the teacher wrong. His dad actually sat him down and asked if he was on drugs because the transformation was just that absurd. Ultimately, Muldoon grew up to become a highly successful high school assistant principal. But that weird ninth grade turnaround left him utterly confused for years. That confusion just simmered until one random day at a miserable summer job. A mom walked in and bought her kid a toy car, but this wasn't just any toy car. It was a sparkly gold Matchbox car with a weird white roof. It was an exact, undeniable replica of his dad's old car from those sixth grade cassette tape days. And seeing that specific car triggered a massive epiphany. It hit him like a ton of bricks. Muldoon realized it wasn't a coincidence. That Jedi history teacher really had manipulated his brain, proving exactly what that cheesy cassette tape guy had claimed years earlier. The human brain can absolutely be tricked into doing things it doesn't want to do. Which perfectly tees up section 2, how brain patterns control us. What Muldoon stumbled onto as a teenager wasn't just some lucky hunch. It's actually a foundational concept in neuroplasticity. The idea that our brain establishes patterns that just run on autopilot is backed by some intense behavioral research. The empirical evidence proving this is so fascinating, and honestly, understanding it is totally key to recognizing why our own minds do what they do. Let's rapid fire through 3 wild studies. Back in 1911, researchers noticed women who typically wore those massive fashionable hats of the era would duck and tilt their heads when walking through doorways, even when they weren't wearing the hats. The pattern was totally locked in. Jump to 2013. Scientists observed that young women suffering from anorexia would turn sideways to squeeze through really wide double doors, entirely unaware that their distorted thought patterns were dictating their physical movements. And in a modern study at the University of Pennsylvania, researchers found that football players who simply imagined throwing a perfect pass experienced performance gains similar to actually physically practicing it on the field. Unconscious thought patterns dictate our actions, and half the time, we have zero clue it's even happening. And this brilliantly illustrates how those patterns interact up there. Muldoon uses this fantastic visual of a speed dating event. Just imagine a massive auditorium inside your brain, where your positive and negative thought patterns are constantly moving from table to table, having conversations with each other. They interact constantly. A surplus of positive patterns will literally lessen the impact of a negative one. This is exactly why a supremely positive person can suddenly get hit with bad news and bounce back quickly. They've got built-in emotional resilience because their positive thoughts counteract the negative impact. On the flip side, if your predominant thoughts are overwhelmingly negative, even a genuinely joyful life event is just going to feel fleeting. So, knowing all this, let's look at Section 3, the faking it fallacy. Back when Muldoon was 15 and had his big Matchbox car epiphany, he obviously didn't know the deep science, but he knew the motivational tapes promised results. So he decided to aggressively test the cassette guy's advice by conducting this entirely unscientific experiment on himself. His grand goal? To make himself cool. Now, he was, by his own admission, a highly intense and completely uncool teenager. But man, did he commit. Every single morning, he woke up, stared in the mirror, and told himself how amazingly, ridiculously cool he was. He went for broke. He literally went out, bought blue paint, his favorite color, and painted the letters COOL in a massive font right on his bedroom wall across from his bed. And, for a brief moment, he actually managed to convince his own brain that he was the coolest kid in school. But you really can't just slap a positive sticker over a negative reality. The entire experiment shattered the day his genuinely popular younger sister burst into his room, caught him talking to himself about how cool he was, and delivered this absolutely crushing reality check. She looked at him and said, "Maybe you shouldn't try to be cool. Maybe you should just try to be happy for a little bit so that we're not all miserable being around you." Ouch, right? It was incredibly harsh, sure, but it exposed the fatal flaw in that whole fake it till you make it brand of toxic positivity. You literally cannot just lie to yourself. Sitting there totally crushed on his bed, Muldoon started to pull at the threads of his own psychology. He realized he needed to identify what he calls his predominant emotion. That's the primary underlying feeling a person consistently experiences. And he realized something weird. He actually didn't feel unhappy, but he sure wasn't happy either. So what exactly was he feeling? He traced it all the way back to that 6th grade car ride and realized his predominant emotion was just pure, unadulterated anger. He wasn't naturally a miserable guy. He had just spent years being chronically mad about horrific family events that were entirely out of his control. Armed with this massive wave of self-awareness, he dropped the whole cool experiment and launched the gratitude experiment. But because he's a super intense guy, he attacked gratitude like an absolute wild animal. He started thanking everyone for everything. Literally, if you let him borrow a pencil 5 years ago, he would track you down and aggressively thank you for it. It thoroughly confused everyone around him. His dad even sat him down again to ask if he was back on drugs. But this radical, extreme shift to retroactive thanking was the watershed moment. By actively forcing his brain to scan the world for things to be thankful for, he finally stopped his underlying anger in its tracks. He was physically rewiring his brain patterns. Kind of makes you wonder what a radical gratitude scan could do for your own baseline, doesn't it? Which brings us nicely to our final section, be your own life coach. Through trial, error, and a whole lot of intense self-reflection, this journey led Muldoon to develop actionable, everyday trade secrets. He built a real system to actively manage his mindset, rather than just letting his mindset manage him. So let's look at his daily trade secrets. First off, give sincere thanks 3 times a day. It sounds simple, but it is highly effective for brain training. Second, whenever anyone asks how he is, he always answers, "I'm great, I'm living the dream." But here's the brilliant nuance to this. It is not a lie. He isn't faking it to deceive people. He uses the phrase "I'm great" as a deliberate mental trigger. The exact moment he says it out loud, it forces him to do a split-second internal audit. He actively asks himself, wait, am I actually great right now? Now, 99% of the time he is. But if he isn't, saying that trigger phrase forces him to realize it and confront whatever is bothering him immediately. Now, if he does that audit and finds he isn't doing great, he uses what he calls his behavioral science flashcard. It's this simple 4-step process for taking back control. Step 1, name the emotion. Just recognize what you are feeling. Step 2, source it. Pull those painful threads of why, like, why are you actually angry or sad today? Step 3, identify what you actually want to be in that moment. And finally, step 4, consciously manage and overwrite the old pattern with the new one. This is a highly structured process, folks. Without a conscious, deliberate system to manage these thought patterns, your brain will absolutely just default to its old, deeply rutted neural pathways. You know, when he was younger, Muldoon used to call this whole process mind over matter. But today, he realizes a much more accurate term is being your own coach. It is incredibly hard, exhausting, full-time work to constantly monitor your own thought patterns. But as Muldoon points out, it literally saved his life. It took a kid that everyone, even his beloved teachers, thought was a total lost cause, destined to die young, and it turned him into a thriving, positive adult. So, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Think back to that massive auditorium in your brain. If your internal voices are constantly speed dating, just moving from table to table, interacting with each other all day long, what kind of conversations are you actually letting them have? Are you actively coaching them, or are you just letting them run the show? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you some fantastic, practical tools to start coaching your own cognitive patterns. Catch you next time.